أعزائي الطلاب السلام عليكم. اليوم we start our new chapter problem solving with loops. So we took before we can see the objectives of this chapter, and we took before, if you remember, we took we have three basic structures for any solution for any problem. The first one was sequential, which means we execute each statement by statement. The first statement, then the second statement, then the third statement, then the fourth statement, and so. The second structure is the decision structure, which is regarding using if statement. If condition true, we execute. If false, we execute different instructions, and so. Now we will take the loop logic structure. The loop logic structure is including عملية repeating of executing of instructions. So loop or repeating structure. Okay, the same thing and the same concept. So we are doing the same task over and over until a condition became false or became true, depending on the structure we are using. It's harder to understand, but it's harder doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's not it's more difficult than the whole decision structure. Okay, so the looping structure, instead of course it depends on a condition, but it will keep repeating the instruction until the condition is false, or sometimes until the condition is true. So the loop structure maybe can have different syntax. The semantics are the same, and the syntax are different in each language from another language, of course. But we have three different basic semantics for this looping logic structure. First, we can use while and while end. Of course, while end, while in the start and while end at the end. This is not the syntax, it's the semantic. It's how we use it. How we write it in C++ or Java, the syntax will be different from Visual Basic to Java to C++ and so, okay? So while will keep executing the instructions while the condition is true, and it will stop repeating when the condition became false. Repeat until loop, it will keep repeating the instructions until the loop became true. So while in the repeat until while the condition is false, the loop will keep going. So it's something like reversing the while structure, okay? And we have the last structure, which is called the automatic counter loop. The automatic counter loop, if we know how many times we should or we want to repeat this loop, we use a counter loop. This loop depends on a variable to be incremented until we reach a value, then we stop. Okay, so we have these three structures. Of course, the algorithm and the flowchart for each of these three types of looping are different. Remember, we have while, and we have repeat, and we have counter. Okay, so here we are. The second point we are talking about the indent. It's very important. The indent is not part of the programming, but it's of organizing the programming. So the instructions that belongs to the loop should be shifted to the right. So we know that these instructions must be repeated. So this is what we call ident. So in Python, for example, we must use ident for the decision and looping instructions. Okay. So ident in نطق فراغ حتى تبين انه ايش هم مجموعه الانستركشنز اللي لازم ينعادوا، فبكونوا مزوحين على اليمين and tapping to the one of the three types of loops, so we know that which is instructions must be repeated, and this is improve readability. And if you remember what we mean by readability, we mean that your program can be understood by you and by others after a while, so it can be upgraded and it can be corrected if there is any problems. And we have another concept in loops, like we have nested decision structure, nested if statements, we have nested loops too. So this is part of this chapter, and we have different standard types of tasks that most of the time we need loops to accomplish these tasks. Most of them are counting or accumulating. So what we mean by counting and what we mean by accumulating, this will be explained in the next slides. Of course, counting is counting how many times this repeating will occur, how many students in a class, how many clients entered, for example, a site, how many students made or attend the exam or attend the lecture. So it's this counting. We use counting and we use loop in counting. Accumulating, it's like summing values. For example, if we need to sum 100 numbers, so we need accumulating. Okay, so that's what we mean by counting and accumulating. Either way, if we counting or we are accumulating, both tasks we should add or subtract a number from a variable. So the result is stored into the same variable, and this variable will be incremented or will be decremented. Okay. So the difference between counting and accumulating is in the value is added or subtracted from the variable. So we are depending on a variable. So this variable in the counting, we should increment this variable, yes, by increment with constant number. For example, if we count the number of clients, each time we increment by 1. Okay, so the counting, the value to be added or subtracted is constant. When accumulating, the value is a variable, and the resultant variable, which includes the result, should start with 0, should be initialized with 0. So we should initialize in counting, and in accumulating, we should initialize our variables to 0. Okay, so we said in the counting we increment. So what we mean by increment, we add a constant to the variable, then store the result in the variable itself. For example, this is the syntax of incrementing a counter. So counter equal counter, variable counter equal counter plus 1. So it was 0, now 0 plus 1, counter equal 1. If we repeat this statement, counter equal 1, which is the value of counter, plus 1, it will be 2. So now it's 2. The next time looping, counter will equal counter 2 plus 1, which will be 3, and so. So here in counting, we always increment by constant. 1 here, it's a number, but we can call it a constant. Or for example, c equals c plus 1, the same thing. It's the variable different. Here the name is counter, here the name is c, but here the concept is the same. Okay, so always we start counter from 0 and start adding constant to this counter, and this is mostly in counting, not in accumulating. Okay, so we have to notice that if we increment, we have the variable in the same in the two sides, counter equal counter. If we see a counter equal 1, we don't increment. Always we will put 1 in counter. So counter. So if we go to the last, so the variable should appear in both sides. You can't say counter equal 1. Counter will equal counter plus 1. Okay. So this is explaining how things work. Of course, the increment, we can say counter equal counter plus 1, or plus 2, or plus 5, or plus 6, or we can say counter equal counter minus 2 or minus 3. So we can increment or decrement في عملية usually counting for a counter. Okay, accumulating is summing a group of numbers. For example, if I ask you to sum the numbers from 1 to 5, so we need to sum 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. So we need to repeat it 5 times. Each time we have to put in the sum plus a variable. The variable, the first time it will be 1. The second time it will be 2. The third time it will be 3. So it's not like counting. Here we add a variable, change in the value. So this is accumulating. This is what we call accumulating. Okay. So what you need to know when you look at this statement, is this counting or accumulating? It's accumulating because we are in this side sum, in this side sum, and here plus variable. In the previous, it was sum equal sum plus 1. It's counting, it's not accumulating. Okay. The total sales, for example, equal total sales plus sales. Sales is variable. The first time it will be 100, then it will be 200, then 50, and so. Okay. So this is accumulating. So until now, what's the difference between counting and accumulating? Counting, we always add constant number to the variable. Accumulating, we always add or subtract a variable to the original variable. Okay, to the sum, to the total sales, we add sales, which is a variable by itself. Okay, so either way, we have to initialize sum. If we want to sum the total sales, for example, the sum must be started with 0. It should be initialized to 0. So, for example, calculating product of series, the number is similar to finding sum of series numbers with 2 exceptions. First, the plus sign is replaced by multiplication. Here we are talking about if we are not summing, for example, if I did ask you to sum the numbers from 1 to 5, if I ask you to multiply the numbers from 1 to 5, which is called factorial. فايش هنا بتكون the first thing we multiply اللي هو بنسميه البرودكت مش السم. So the product will start with equal 1. If we are summing, it will start with 0, initialization to 0. Now the product will be product multiplied by a variable اللي هو ايش a number. Okay. So is the same thing accumulating. In accumulating, we can sum numbers and we can multiply numbers at the same time. If we summing numbers, then we start from 0, initialize to 0. If we do multiplication, so the product or the variable should start or initialize to 1. Then we start the same thing, product equal product multiplied, which start with number. Okay. So most of the loops used for counting and for accumulating. So let's look at the syntax of while loop. So the while loop, it looks like this. This is the algorithm. While, condition, or conditions. So we can have one condition or more conditions. Remember, conditions, we always use them using the relational operator. 5 less than 6, A greater than 100, B greater than 80 and less than and great less than 90. This is two conditions. Another two conditions, grade greater than 70 and grade less than 80. So this is conditions, while conditions true. So ident indent here space, we are shifting instructions to the right, will be executed as long as the condition is true. Okay, so this will be executed until while end. Then if the condition, we check the condition again. If it's true, then we'll repeat these instructions again. If the condition still true, we repeat. If we go and find the condition is false, we exit the whole while and go to the next statement after the while. Okay. So what rules you have to do when you work with while? You have to use brackets and indentation. Brackets to put the condition, and indentation, the group of instructions to be repeated, they must be shifted to the right. So we understand these instructions are belonging to the loop أو نسميهم اللي هم body of the while loop. Okay, so here is our while. It looks like this. Okay, here we start from point A in the flowchart. We go to while condition or conditions. If there are more than one condition, then we should use logical operators, and, or between them. While condition 1 and condition 2 or condition 3 and so. If the condition is true, then instruction 1, instruction 2 will be executed. When we finish the body of the while, this one called the body, two instructions, we go to the while. If the condition is still true, we will repeat. We'll keep looping. True, repeat, until the condition became false. So we exit. So there must be an instruction will change the condition to be false so we can exit the loop. If the condition will stay راح يضل true all the time, we will have a problem called infinity loop. لأنه إيش راح يضل إيش البرنامج will keep looping forever. This problem will called an infinity loop. So while condition we put it in a diamond في الفلو chart in a diamond, and if it's true will be executed the instructions. If false, we go exit and go to the next instructions after it. Okay, so this is the syntax or the flow chart of the while loop. So this is the flow chart for the while. So if you remember this in structure, instead of putting if here, we put while. If we put if, then if true, it will be executed one time then exit. But here while, if the same thing, we have conditions here. If true, it will be executed. Then we will have this arrow to bring us back to the diamond to check the condition again. Okay. So we first check the condition. If the condition is true, in the diamond, we go and execute the statements. If the condition is false from the start, from the beginning, from the first time, then the instructions will not be executed at all. So the minimum time the while loop will be executed is 0. Because if the condition is false from the first time, we don't execute any statement. Okay, the loop will keep repeating until the condition is false. Then it will stop and go to the next step in the program. Okay, so we have another. This is, you just look at it's not very important. It's very old way of doing loops. Instead of using while here in the structured programming very long time ago, they used if condition. If condition true, then it will execute. But here at the last statement, we have go to the condition again. So go to 100. This statement will be 100. So go to 100. We'll check the condition again until the condition is false. If the condition is false, then it will not be executed. It will go to the end of the go to 200, which is continue the program. Okay, so this is all the style of looping, and it's not required with us. Okay, while end continue. So when we use while, of course you have three different choices for looping. تقدر تستخدم الوايل، تقدر تستخدم اللي هي الدو until، تقدر تستخدم اللي هي الكاونتر loop. But when you will use while, if you don't know how many numbers the times this loop will be executed, maybe 0 times, maybe 10 times, maybe 15 times, you don't know how many times. So we use while على condition. When the condition is false, we stop. The condition true, we do the loop. So if we know how many times, 5 times, 10 times, this loop should be executed, we use another different structure which is called counter controlled loop. Okay, so we use the while when we don't know how many number of times the instructions will be repeated. Okay, so here are some examples of such cases. When you are entering information on clients and you don't know the number of clients. Okay, we have clients every time somebody register in our website, new client, so we have to make information, input information about them. So how many times this loop will work? Why there are no more clients? So we don't know how many clients will be. Another scenario, when you finding the total amount of sales for the day and you don't know the number of sales. You have different brands عندك فروع كثيرة في مدن كثيرة. مش عارف كم السيلز تبعونك. You use while there is more sales. True. We total sale equal اللي هو total sale plus sales. Okay. When you calculate English test average for students the class, how many students, you don't know how many students attended the class, especially now في التعليم عن بعد ما بتعرف كم واحد قدم الامتحان. So while there is more students, you will present for them the exam or the questions to answer. Okay, so you don't know how the number. You know the class is 45, but you don't know how many students will make this exam. In these cases, we use the while loop. So in general, while loop, when we don't know how many times we will use the instructions or repeat the instructions, we use the while loop. Okay. Examples: how many times given positive integer number can be divided by 2 before it's less than or equal to 1? Okay, you have to try to understand the problem. The problem here is if you are given positive number 100, for example, this positive integer number. How many times we divide it by 2 before it became less أقل أو يساوي 1? We don't know. So how can we write a while loop for that? So while the number which is entered by the user greater or equal 1, number equal number divided by 2. Okay, how many times? To know how many times, you put a counter. So we have count, it's a variable, equal count plus 1. Count will start from 0. So this is an example of using while loop. Check whether the number is a prime number or not using while. Is it prime or not? So this is another example. You don't know how many times you should run the loop until you get the result. Okay. So here we don't know how many times, so we use while. Here it's very important to know the condition, how to make the condition from the problem. So how many times given a positive integer number, so we have here number and we have to input a number, can be divided by 2 when we stop before it is less than or equal to 1. So it will keep working while it's greater than 1. So while the number greater or equal 1, we will keep dividing by 2. When the number became less than 1, then we should stop. Okay, so this is how we write the while loop, and you need to know how to how to formulate the condition for the while loop. Okay, we have a problem here. We need you to think about it until the next class. The problem is create the algorithm and the flowchart to find the average age of all students in the class. Okay, in an average age أو مش الافريج ايج اللي هو الافريج grade of all the students in the class. Okay, I want you to study this at home, understand why, and we continue our next meeting with this problem and how to solve it. Okay, thank you and see you in the next class, inshallah.